the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. As we greet you on this, it was the 17th day today of the month of Rajab, and tonight is the 18th night. From here at the studios of the Islamic Broadcasting Network in my native island of Trinidad in the Caribbean, with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and with the dua, Allahumma barik lana fi Rajabin wa Shaban wa baligna Ramadan. With Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are addressing tonight an extremely, and let me repeat it again, extremely important subject and in current affairs. And that's my specialization. I've studied international affairs in two universities. I did it at the Institute of International Relations of the University of the West Indies, and I had what a wonderful teacher. Yes, what a wonderful teacher in Professor Leslie Manigat from Haiti, who is the chairman, the director of the Institute. And I came at the top of the class in the exams. And then I went to Geneva to the Graduate Institute of International Studies to again study international relations. So current affairs is a subject in which I have some measure of specialization. And I also bring to bear on my analysis of current affairs my knowledge of the Quran, because Allah says in the Quran, this is what He says in Surah Al-Nahl, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ونزلنا عليك الكتاب تبيانا لكل شيء إلى آخر الآية. And I have sent down this book on thee, O Muhammad, Allah's blessing be upon him, that it might explain all things. And therefore, it might not only explain the past and the present when it was revealed, but also the future. The Quran will explain the future. It explains the movement of history. And we are located at a very, very, very interesting moment in history, when it is plain and clear to all of mankind, except perhaps some here in Trinidad, that the United States of America, which has given to the world something called Pax Americana, meaning America wants the rest of the world to submit to it. It must dominate the rest of the world. That's Pax Americana. That no rival can exist and no combination of rivals. That Pax Americana, which has had its day in the sunshine, is now in decline. And it is now in its swan song. The American government is now behaving in a very strange way because of the decline of Pax Americana, and as a consequence of that also the decline of the US dollar. So what are we to expect now? We had a session with David Abdullah, who is a political analyst for whom we have a lot of respect. Yes, we have a lot of respect for David Abdullah as a political analyst. And he will be joining us tonight to give us his new views on what has just occurred in Venezuela. But before we invite David to join the discussion, I want to put into the record some of my views on the subject from the perspective of the Quran, from the perspective of Islam, from the perspective of Islamic eschatology. Our viewing audience in Trinidad would be able to make calls to join the discussion to ask questions, and more than that, to offer comments. You'll find the telephone numbers at the bottom of the screen. But this program is also being broadcast live on YouTube, IBN Master, which is the YouTube channel of the IBN cable television. And if you are abroad, I don't know how many would be waking at this time of the night abroad. It would be very late at night. And if you want to call in from abroad and you want a WhatsApp number, then you'll get an email address at the bottom of the screen, and you send an email, and then our staff here will send you a WhatsApp number. We wouldn't put the number on the screen. And then from abroad you can also comment and also ask questions on the subject of the current conduct of the United States of America, the government and the armed forces of the United States of America in this region of the world. And so let me first of all say that Allah spoke in the Quran on the subject of what is happening in world affairs. And we have in Islamic eschatology, we have the end time before the end of the world, the time of Al-Asr, the last hour before the end of the world. And in that end time, there are certain actors who are going to emerge in history. Amongst them, according to Islamic eschatology, is the Antichrist, Dajjal, the false Messiah. Amongst them in Islamic eschatology is Gog and Magog. Amongst them in Islamic eschatology is Dabbatul Ardu, the creature of the earth, and we cannot tonight deal with these subjects. No, but this is not unique to Islamic eschatology. They're also in Christian eschatology. They're also in Jewish eschatology. And perhaps there's also a hint of it in Hindu eschatology. So when we come to the Quran and Islamic eschatology, Allah speaks about a shadow which will come to the world, and He warns mankind about the shadow, and the shadow will come with three parts. Now then, let us teach a very simple subject in the methodology for the study of the Quran, and I hope my viewing audience will show a little patience with me, because the subject is hardly ever taught. The Quran says that there are two kinds of verses in the Quran. One are verses which are plain and clear, and all that you need to do is explain them. These are ayah muhkama. And Allah says about these verses that they constitute the very heart of the book. They are Ummul Kitab. They have a very high status. But then He speaks about a second kind of verses. And these are verses which cannot be understood unless they are interpreted. And these are called ayat mutashabihat. But they are not a part of Ummul Kitab, or the heart of the book. They don't have the same status as those verses which are plain and clear. But these verses which have to be interpreted are also important. They are a part of the Quran. And in the same way that the Quran has verses which have to be interpreted in order to be understood, similar with all scriptures, all scriptures. And when you interpret a verse of the Quran, you say, when Allah said this, He meant that. When you interpret a verse of the Quran, you must always say, Allah knows best. Because only Allah can confirm that an interpretation of the Quran is correct. If you interpret the Quran and your interpretation is correct, then it becomes truth, and truth will survive. The dogs can bark, but the caravan will keep on moving. But if you interpret the Quran and your interpretation is wrong, you will still be blessed for the effort that you made and for having the sense to say Allah knows best. And tomorrow that will go down the river of no return and be forgotten. So when I interpret the Quran, when Allah says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ انطَلِقُوا إِلَى ظِلٍّ ذِي ثَلَاثِ شُعَبٍ, proceed to a shadow comprised of 3 parts. No one, just no one has the authority to say, my explanation is the final word. No one has the authority to do that. Only Allah can confirm that an interpretation is correct. And we have the freedom to interpret the Quran. No one can stop us from doing that. So now then, I am interpreting this verse of the Quran and I'm saying Allah knows best. When Allah says, انطَلِقُوا إِلَى ظِلٍّ ذِي ثَلَاثِ شُعَبٍ, proceed to a shadow comprised of 3 parts. And Allah is warning about this shadow. So this is not a good shadow, a warning. It's a shadow which brings punishment. My interpretation, and Allah knows best, is that the shadow is the Antichrist, Dajjal, al-Masih al-Dajjal. I have spent years and years and years of my life on the study of the end time. I don't think any scholar has devoted as much effort and time in this age as I have done to the study of the end time. And I have written so many books on the subject, on the end time. So I do deserve some respect when I offer a view on the subject. I say that the shadow is Dajjal, the false Messiah, the Antichrist. And he has a profile with footprints of 3 parts. He wants to rule the world from Jerusalem. And when he rules the world from Jerusalem, he will declare, I am the Messiah. In order to do that, he, number one, has to liberate the Holy Land, which is under Muslim rule. Number 2, he has to bring the Jews back to Jerusalem to reclaim it as their own. 2,000 years after they were expelled and Allah banned their return. Number 3, he has to restore a state of Israel in Jerusalem and get people to accept, particularly the Jews, that this is holy Israel of Solomon, Nabi Sulaiman, and David, Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. And number 4, he has to cause that state of Israel to become the ruling state in the world, as it was in the time of Nabi Sulaiman, Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. Only then can he stand up in Jerusalem and say, I am the Messiah. Of course, that would be a lie. He would not be the Messiah. The Messiah is the son of Maryam, Jesus, the son of Mary, who came, who left, and who will return. So now then, I have mentioned in my book, Jerusalem in the Quran, which was written 25 years ago. That's a long, long time. That in his effort to rule the world from Jerusalem, he passes through 3 stages. 3 stages. In the first stage, he created Pax Britannica, where Britain became a ruling state in the world with an obsession with the Holy Land. And it was a British army which conquered Jerusalem in 1917. A British general who then declared the Crusades are now over. It was Britain which declared in 1917 something called the Balfour Declaration, that it is Britain's intention to establish and support the creation of a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Then it was Britain who ruled over Palestine with a mandate delivered by the League of Nations from 1917 to 1948. It was Britain who presided over the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, and Britain which has consistently supported that Israel. But then came a period of time when Pax Britannica began to decline, and that was the First World War and the Second World War. And by the time the Second World War came to an end, Britain's day in the sun was coming to an end, and the United States was taking over from Britain, and a Pax Americana was replacing Pax Britannica. And this was the second stage of the Jaws 3 stages. And when the Pax Americana came, the US dollar replaced the sterling pound. And Washington replaced London as the ruling capital in the world. And the United States now began the effort to take over from Britain in ruling the whole world. As Britain once ruled the world, Pax Britannica, the sun never sets on the British Empire. By 1914, when the First World War started, Britain controlled every single important naval base in the whole world. So now then, the United States of America begins to replicate Britain. And this is stage 2 of the JAWS mission. And the United States of America creates maybe 1,000 military bases all over the world. The United States want to rule the world. The whole world must submit to the United States. And this is Pax Americana. And the United States maintains the same obsession with Israel, like Trump now still has with Israel. The whole world is condemning genocide in Gaza, including Trinidad and Tobago. But no, Trump still supports Netanyahu. And Trump is still in support of Israel, and his party in support of Israel. This is the obsession with Jerusalem and Israel, and this is Pax Americana. So in my book, Jerusalem in the Quran, published 25 years ago, I argued that there is a third stage of the process still to come, and that Pax Americana will give way to Pax Judaica. And that's where we are now. Pax Americana is now in irreversible decline, and it has to give way to Pax Judaica. We take a little break now. Bismillahi awwaluhu wa akhiruhu. We were saying that there is a movement from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana to Pax Judaica. That in the same way that Britain ruled the world, and the British pound was used to help Britain to rule the world, and that was the first stage of 3 parts, and then the United States replaced Britain, and the US dollar replaced the sterling pound, both bogus money, and the same obsession that Britain had with Jerusalem and with Israel, the United States had the same obsession up to this day with Jerusalem and the State of Israel. But our Islamic eschatology said 25 years ago that there is a third stage of the process still to come, and it will be a Pax Judaica. And now we have arrived at that moment in history when the United States is showing signs of irreversible decline. And the United States dollar is in a difficult situation. And we want to use this background of Islamic eschatology today with David Abdullah, who is a respected political analyst who was with us last week. And now, since the last time we had a session, we had this kidnapping, that is the correct word. That is the correct word. The kidnapping by the U.S. government and the U.S. armed forces, kidnapping of the president of Venezuela. Ostensibly, we were told, for matters connected with drug trafficking. But now the secret, the worst kept secret ever, is out. The reason why they kidnapped him is because they want Venezuela's oil. But that's not the whole story. There is much more to the kidnapping of Maduro than simply Venezuelan oil. It is not just the United States of America flexing its muscles in this backyard of the Caribbean, but making a statement around the world. And we are very, very happy to have with us our dear brother, David Abdullah, once again. And he is going to share with us his new thinking now since the kidnapping has taken place. David, welcome once again.
Maulana, thank you very much for having me back again. And yes, when we last spoke, you were making the point, and I agreed, that the United States, it was inevitable.
Inevitable.
That was the word that we used.
Yeah.
For the attack on Venezuela. We were looking and discussing the different options of military attack, but we said the attack was inevitable. And I think we were all a bit surprised at how easily that happened on early Saturday morning. Quite clearly, the U.S. forces were able to shut down all of Venezuela's air defenses, their communication systems, and so on, and therefore they were able to get in and get out, without any counterattack taking place. But we do have to recognize that 32 Cubans were killed, part of President Maduro's security detail, and there were quite a number of Venezuelans who were also killed. The Western media is not talking about that. And since then, I had a program just a few days ago on my Tuesday talk with the MSJ and had someone from Venezuela speaking. And the report that she gave was that people have been coming out in their thousands in support of President Maduro, calling for his immediate release from the United States, and in support of the Bolivarian revolution continuing. The Western media is not carrying those reports. And there are massive protests that took place in London. There were 2,000 people outside number 10 Downing Street on Monday, demanding that Starmer take a position. Of course, he hasn't. In fact, he has. A position in support of the U.S. because he used the RAF just a day or so ago to help the Americans seize the Russian oil tanker in the North Atlantic. But there was thousands of people demonstrating in Italy and France, throughout Europe, Spain, in support of the Bolivarian process and against U.S. imperialism. So this is what we're in a really new moment, historical moment, where the United States essentially has torn up all of the international norms that have been in place, certainly since 1945, after the end of the Second World War. They've torn up the United Nations Charter, because the UN Charter in Article 2.4 says very explicitly that no state shall use force or threaten to use force against any other state or any other political territory and so on. It's very, very clear. And it's also very clear that the head of government or head of state has immunity from prosecution in another country's jurisdiction. Now, not the International Criminal Court, because that's an international body, but no country can try a sitting head of state or head of government in their country. So what the United States is doing is totally illegal, goes totally contrary to international law, against the United Nations Charter. But Mr. Trump thinks that he could do whatever he pleases, whenever he pleases, wherever he pleases. So he's threatening Colombia, he's threatening Cuba. We spoke about that on the last occasion, that it's not just Venezuela, but it is about the U.S. trying to capture as much as of the world's resources, starting in this hemisphere, but not stopping. And they bombed Nigeria on Christmas Day, on the 25th of December, supposedly because Trump said that Christians were being killed and were facing genocide, which is not true at all. And the real intent, in my view, of going after Nigeria was to begin to signal that they're going after the Sahel. And I believe there was a report that there was an attempted coup d'etat in Burkina Faso against Captain Traoré.
This happened.
Just after, a few days after they bombed Nigeria. So a lot is happening and it is about, you're right, the U.S. economy is in decline. And so they're in huge debt. The American government is in huge debt. They're running massive fiscal deficits, and they're getting bigger under Trump because he's given the billionaire class tax breaks. And at the same time, they're running a huge external trade deficit because the United States imports more than they export. And the only way they can sustain that, which is artificially being sustained, is by keeping the dollar as the world's principal currency of exchange. Once that goes, and people therefore no longer want to hold dollars or invest in US dollar securities in the United States, then the capital inflows going into the US, which help to balance their trade deficit, that disappears. And then the US will be no better off than any country that has a massive debt to GDP ratio of over 100% and running external account balances. In other words, their imports are greater than their exports. And so the only way they could, apart from maintaining the US dollar as the principal currency of exchange, and therefore having people buying US dollars or investing in the United States securities and so on, or buying stocks and shares on the US stock market and bond market, is to capture natural resources everywhere and subjugate countries, recolonize, because you talked about Pax Britannica, that developed on the basis of British colonialism and imperialism.
That's right.
Walter Rodney wrote about it in his famous book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Okay.
So it was the extraction of wealth, the exploitation of labor, enslavement of Africans, of course, being central to that enriched Europe and helped Europe to industrialize and gain huge amounts of capital, which they didn't generate within their own domestic economies. They generated that capital by exploiting and exploiting labor and extracting resources from our countries. And the United States has done that too. But they're now at this critical moment where they have to go back and do it again in a massive way in order to save their own domestic economy.
And this discussion on international economics and on international monetary economics can take us on a fascinating road. But we have some more urgent matters to discuss, and perhaps we can invite someone from the Institute of International Relations here in St. Augustine. There is a Venezuelan scholar here.
Yes. There's a Cuban scholar.
Cuban scholar.
Cuban scholar, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know her very well.
You know her?
Yes, she's an economist.
Yes.
Jacqueline LaGuardia.
That's right.
Yes.
If we can get her to come,
yes,
we can discuss the economics and the monetary economics of the system.
Her mother is also a highly respected economist in Cuba.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. For the Cuban economy, for the Latin American economy, and for the world economy. But we have some more urgent matters.
Yes.
We have some more urgent matters to discuss this tonight. And our viewing audience here in Trinidad, the lines are going to be open another 15 minutes. We have the prayer for Isha. And after the Isha prayer, we'll open the lines. And in between calls, we can continue our discussion.
Sure.
And also, we hope, because the broadcast is live on YouTube, on IBN Master. That's their YouTube channel. And those people abroad who would like to call in, they would have to send an email. The email address will be at the bottom of the screen, and then our team will give them a WhatsApp number which they can call. Now then, David, the brazen attack on Venezuela, defying all conventional laws, defying the UN Charter, defying everything, the flexing of the muscles by Trump, and the kidnapping of Venezuela's president has not changed the government
Correct.
of Venezuela.
Correct.
The government of Venezuela is still intact. The armed forces of Venezuela are still intact. What is likely to now be a follow-up of what has happened so far? Are we likely to witness now more military interventions, not only in Venezuela, but elsewhere in this region?
Yes, and you recall, Maulana, that when we spoke, I was saying that people talk about Maduro as if he's the be-all and end-all. And I said that's not so. There's a party, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, there's a leadership and a government and the military and so on. And so there's state institutions. And those state institutions functioned right away. On the Sunday, the day afterwards, the Supreme Court met and, according to the Constitution, determined that Delcy Rodriguez, as the vice president, would become the temporary president because the president, Maduro, is not dead. If he had died, as President Chavez died, then they would have to call an election within 30 days, according to the Venezuelan Constitution, which is what happened in 2012, I think it was. So President Maduro was acting, and then there was an election, and he was elected. But in this case, President Maduro is alive. So he's absent from the jurisdiction, and therefore there is a temporary president or an acting president who is Delcy Rodriguez, according to the Constitution. And on the Monday, quite coincidentally, the Legislative Assembly, which is their parliament, which had been elected late last year, I think it was in October or November, their term of office started in January. And therefore, they were sworn in January. And when they were sworn in, or when they met as an assembly, Delcy Rodriguez actually at the same time took the oath of office as the acting president. So the institutions are there and are working, and the cabinet is working. And you're right, the military is still there and intact. So Trump said that to Delcy, if you don't behave, this is talking to a schoolgirl, if you don't behave, then your fate will be worse than Maduro. Now, people don't know who Delcy Rodriguez is. She is the daughter of revolutionary figure in Venezuela who was fighting against repression, was jailed, tortured, and died in jail being tortured, yes, in the 70s.
Okay.
So she has within her DNA, if you wish, in her family tradition, a tradition of struggle against injustice. She lost her father when she was probably still a teenager, I suppose. Yes? So she has come up in that process. Yes, she's very highly educated, University, London, Paris, and so on, very highly educated. She's an attorney and so on. So she's a very capable person, technically. And the last few years, she was very responsible for restoring Venezuela's economic growth.
Okay.
She was Minister of the Economy, Minister of Energy, and she had to restore Venezuela's economic growth. So she's a very competent person, but she also is a very conscious revolutionary person.
Very good.
Yes, and she's not afraid to stand up and tell other world leaders where to get off. Now, there have been reports about, which Trump has exaggerated, because I've been making some inquiries quietly, and Trump says, she's agreed to give us 50 million barrels of oil, and Rubio said she has to do whatever we tell her to do because we'll crash the Venezuelan economy. That is not what she's saying. She's saying that we will treat with the United States and everybody else with mutual respect. We will engage with them in trade and other matters, which is what Maduro was saying previously. And so she has not strayed from that position. And so it's going to be interesting now to see exactly how the government of Venezuela is going to be able to keep the economy going, because they were exporting. The media was talking about 120,000 barrels of oil. That's not true. They were exporting close to a million barrels of oil a day. They were exporting. Chevron, the United States company itself, was exporting 200,000 to 300,000 barrels of oil a day. So with now that naval blockade, it's going to be more difficult for them to export as much as they were, which would impact on their foreign exchange and government revenue and so on. But as we were mentioning in our last discussion, they have significantly recovered their agricultural sector, so they're now producing maybe 80 to 90% of all the food requirements that they need. That is major, because if people are getting food and the food is inexpensive and so on, then that's one major problem that they don't have to deal with if that naval blockade continues. So this is going to be a key moment, and therefore Trump can always use the military to go again. But he has to now calculate on two other things. One, you did that attack once. It's not that easy to do it again the same way, because the Venezuelans will be wiser about the nature of another attack that might be coming. Secondly, the world reaction to that imperialist attack and the kidnapping of President Maduro and the First Lady Celia Flores, the world opinion and the opinion in the United States is very opposed to what Trump did. And so for him to do it again, I think is going to, the political calculations that he has to make is going to be problematic, because what is he going to argue? That Delcy was also involved in narco trafficking? That he never made that case. And interestingly, the day that President Maduro and his wife appeared in court in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, the U.S. Justice Department in their indictment amended it and took out any reference to the cartel of the Suns. You remember that was what?
Okay.
They said President Maduro was the head of the cartel of the Suns, and we all saying that was a fictitious, it didn't exist. They've removed it because they know they have no evidence of that. Yes, so
Okay.
so they're to go again is greater, in my view, political risk, but you could never tell with Trump what he might do.
In other words, David, you are not anticipating further military action against Venezuela to force submission to the United States?
Not at the moment. I think they're going to try to strangle them with the naval and the air blockade.
Okay.
And see how that goes.
And then if the United States is not likely to engage in further military action against Venezuela at this time, does that mean that the rest of the region is safe from military attack from the United States at this time?
No, because although I saw statements by Trump saying that the Colombian President Petro is supposed to meet him in Washington, I don't know why Petro would go to Washington to meet Trump. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. But Colombia, I think, is still in the sights, but more specifically Cuba.
Cuba.
I think Cuba, because Trump said Cuba is about to fall, and which is not true, but that's his statement. And Rubio, as we were discussing, really would like to destroy the Cuban Revolution. And I think, therefore, that if they do want to attack, they may try and attack on Cuba, but that is going to be far more problematic than even the attack on Venezuela in many respects.
The last time we met, we came to the conclusion, and we were correct. We were anticipating that the United States would launch an attack on Venezuela, and it happened.
Yes.
At this time, however, we do not anticipate another attack on Venezuela, but you are suggesting that it might be possible that there'll be attack on Colombia, and on Cuba. Now then, the United States is engaged in very delicate negotiations with Russia on Ukraine.
Yes.
For the whole of this year. And those negotiations are reaching close to a climax now. In these negotiations, the United States has shown some measure of respect for Russia as an adversary. But we just saw something recently that a tanker which had been stopped, and then the American Navy was pursuing this tanker, the tanker suddenly got permission from Russia to fly the Russian flag.
Correct.
And the United States chose to ignore that and to pursue the tanker and to board and to seize the tanker. In other words, throwing the glove at Russia.
Yes, and they did that with the support, the United States did it with the support of the British, RAF.
Good.
That was reported, yes.
Can we establish a link between the present conduct of the United States in Venezuela and in the Western Hemisphere, flexing its muscles, and the negotiations in Ukraine to try to bring about a resolution to the problem in Ukraine? Do you see any connection between the two?
That's an interesting question, and we're getting into the realm of some suppositions, which I don't like to generally to get into. And we don't know what the conversations have been between Trump and Putin, and whether or not Trump has said to Putin, okay, we will concede many of the things you want with respect to Ukraine if you don't push us too hard on Venezuela. People have been saying those things. I have no evidence of that. I suppose time will tell. That is, of course, in the realm of possibility.
Okay.
States tend to pursue their own interests first and not necessarily pursue the interests of others.
We have just a few minutes before the Azan for Isha, but before we end, is it possible that the United States was baiting China and Russia in the Western Hemisphere, daring them to block U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, baiting them that if Russia or China had ever made the mistake of swallowing the bait and coming to defend their allies in this part of the world, Venezuela and Cuba in particular, the United States would then be prepared to take on a military confrontation with Russia and China in a region where the United States will have the upper hand because of geographical proximity, whereas the United States does not want to take on Russia in Ukraine because Russia will have the advantage of geographical proximity. We have to stop now for the Isha Azan, and until we get the Azan, we can hear your response.
Yes, I think that could have been part of the equation. But Russia and China, I think, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, would not have taken that. They didn't take the bait and would not have thought about taking the bait either. But what is significant is that they have said very clearly, certainly in terms of China, and I want to raise the question of Iran as well, because the demonstrations that have broken out in Iran seem to me to be also coincidental, because Trump then said, we will attack Iran very soon if people are killed in Iran, the protesters are killed. So that's another part of the puzzle.
Time to break for the Azan, okay. Bismillahi awwaluhu wa akhiruhu. We were discussing before the Azan broke, the Azan of Salatul Isha, the possibility of further American military intervention in this part of the world, because neither Russia nor China intervened or took the bait to intervene to save Venezuela. And therefore, Trump and his American administration is likely to recognize this as an open door to be exploited to the advantage of possible further military interventions, which will bring about a catastrophic change in this part of the world. Could you kindly respond to that?
Yes, it's quite clear that he thinks now that he is Lord of all and master of all that he surveys. I mean, he's behaving like that, you know.
Yeah.
He's saying, the West, and they've said it, the Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere.
That's right.
And nobody can come into this hemisphere. And the national security strategy said that they must, one of the objectives is to keep out any power from outside the hemisphere and not allow them to have any military capability or threat to the United States and so on. So that they're very explicit. I mean, one thing about Trump and his statements is that he's not hiding anything.
No.
Previous American presidents would try to dress things up in some kind of talk of democracy and values and so on. Nothing to do with values and democracy. Straight case. This is ours. We're going to control it. And it will be very difficult for Russia and China militarily unless they were to locate a base in Cuba or something like that, which would then raise the ante, like the Cuban Missile Crisis did in 1962 or 63. And so the issue would now turn, which some people are suggesting, and this is one of the things that some of the elements in the United States are very concerned about, and Western Europe, that what Trump has done by breaking the international order in this very dramatic way, that China could now say, okay, if you have done this to Venezuela, Taiwan, which officially is part of China, it's not now a separate state, it's officially part of China, that we are now going to go and take control of what is really ours, because Taiwan is part of China. And so people are fearing that could be one of the things that develops in this context. And whether would the United States then try to intervene, because it does have military bases in that part of the world, in South Korea, Taiwan itself, elsewhere they have bases. So would the United States try to intervene in that situation where they now geographically are at a disadvantage, even though they have military assets there? So I think we are entering, Maulana, into a very dangerous stage of world history, because the actions of Trump, while seemingly rational with respect to what the U.S. wants to achieve to save its economy, by disrupting so much is also very irrational and can provoke consequences that can just spiral out of control.
Two questions, David. Anticipating further American military interventions in this region of the world after the successful intervention in Venezuela, in the kidnapping of Maduro, is it possible that countries in South and Central America and the Caribbean who feel threatened can now come together to discuss a possible military alliance where one attack on one will be an attack on all?
The problem with that, Maulana, is that there are not enough like-minded governments. There's Brazil, which is a very large country, of course. There's Mexico. And apart from those two, Venezuela is in a weakened situation now. There's Cuba, which has its own challenges, Colombia, and that's about it. Argentina is very pro-Trump. So now is Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Paraguay, El Salvador, and Honduras now is likely to go that same route, Guatemala. So when you look at the number of countries in South and Central America, the majority of them would be pro-American, majority.
So is it then that Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Cuba are likely to continue to simply sit down and not do something to enhance their security?
They obviously will enhance their security, but I'm not so sure if it will be in the form of a pact.
Okay.
Intra-country pact.
Okay.
Yes.
That brings me to my next question. Korea has demonstrated to the world in a very plain and clear and dramatic way that the Western world will not respect you unless and until you have a deterrent power that they must respect. And so Korea became a nuclear power. And not only a nuclear power, but the missile capacity to deliver a nuclear weapon, even to reach the United States. And with a rampant Trump in this part of the world, is it possible now that you can see a movement in those states which consider them to be threatened by Trump, like Venezuela, like Mexico, like Colombia, like Cuba, and perhaps also Brazil, an effort now to recognize, as we hope Iran is now recognizing, that you will not be able to secure security from a rampant United States of America and Israel, because these two are sisters. You cannot get any security, measure of security that is adequate unless and until you have a nuclear deterrent.
Yes, and the challenge with that, of course, is that it takes some time for them to develop that deterrent, unless it is supplied directly by a country that has that capability. And any attempt, therefore, to develop it internally, the Americans will then bomb it as they did Iran. Yes, that would be what they would do. The interesting thing is that, of course, not spoken about much, is that South Africa has that deterrent. That was the West during apartheid allowed South Africa to develop that.
Okay.
It's not talked about, but I'm pretty certain I'm right about that, because the apartheid regime was part of the imperial and colonial agenda for Africa.
Right.
Yes. And of course, when the government changed, it's now in the hands of the South African government. So, but whether or Mexico or Brazil can do that on their own independently would be, I think, take them too long and very difficult, because they're not known for having developed those kinds of programs. You don't hear about them. But in this, it could be that they could be given it.
That's right.
It could be given it.
Okay.
And by Trump tearing up the international order, the UN Charter, and he just withdrew from 66 international organizations, 30 of them or more being UN organizations, including the very important UN framework for climate change and so on. So if he's tearing up all the orders, world order, then there's no reason why countries can say we are going to go along with that and provide support in that way to our allies.
All right, we have the studio lines at the bottom of the screen, and we will be very happy to receive your calls. Do please, you can start calling now, and we have David with us to respond to your calls. I will also try. There are no calls at the moment, okay? I want to turn now, David, to that part of the subject which we touched on earlier, namely international monetary economics and international economics. First of all, the impact of Trump's military activities in this part of the world on the Trinidad and Tobago economy, on the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, and on the Caribbean economy. Do you have any thoughts on the subject?
Well, certainly in terms of the economy, and I think we did say that what was happening, and before, of course, the attack, and it's become aggravated by the attack, is that a number of persons will cancel bookings to come into Trinidad. It's the carnival season. It is the quote-unquote winter season for Tobago. And I heard the president of the Tobago Chamber just this morning saying that there have been cancellations, so that it's quite clear that, you know, those tensions. There were problems, for example, with flights on Saturday. A number of airlines had to cancel flights in this part of the world because there was a no-fly zone, because you had all these U.S. military planes going up and down and so on. So there is that. Once the U.S. forces remain parked in the Southern Caribbean, then there'll be uncertainty, investor uncertainty about what is going to happen. And so, yes, I think the Trinidad and Tobago economy will be negatively affected. The government of Venezuela has not changed. You made that point earlier. And therefore, there is no dragon gas deal for us at this point in time. There is no cross-border gas possible. And we saw just before the new year that one of the major companies that operate in Point Lisas, Nutrien, which has, I think, about 3 or 4 ammonia plants and another plant, about 4 or 5 plants in that complex, they are pulling out of Trinidad. Not only does that mean a loss of jobs, but it also means a loss of foreign exchange, government revenue, and so on. So our economic situation is not good. And, you know, the national security strategy of the United States talked about encouraging and rewarding governments, political parties, movements that are aligned with their policies. And so the question, I think we may have talked about that, is there some quid pro quo that Mrs. Prasad Bissessar has talked about, negotiated, broached with the U.S. government for her unequivocal support of the U.S. action, which support was reiterated this week at the OAS General Assembly or Council, and also at the Security Council, where Trinidad and Tobago's representatives spoke. And they said that they support the whole United States efforts to deal with narco trafficking. I mean, after the kidnapping, after Trump said it's all about oil, they're still talking about narco trafficking. It was shameful.
It seems that our discussion, our subject of discussion, is too technical for our listening audience. We don't have any cause at this time. We don't move from Trinidad and Tobago, the economy and the implications for the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, to the Cuban economy. And the fact that the United States is blocking oil from reaching Cuba from Venezuela, what would be the implications for the Cuban economy and the Cuban, is it peso?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's the Cuban economy is in great difficulty. The strangulation of the blockade was worsened by COVID. And then, of course, Biden did not release any of the measures that Trump had put in place. And then Trump came back and tightened things even more. So the situation is difficult, and Russia's inability and Venezuela's inability to provide oil is critical, so that Cuba's energy supply situation is problematic. Quite apart from old infrastructure, the supply of oil to run the generators is a real issue. However, China has put in huge solar farms in Cuba, and that will help, but it's not yet to the point where their dependence on imported oil to run the generators in the power stations has been significantly reduced. Years ago, as we talk about nuclear, years ago, the Soviet Union was actually building a nuclear power station in Cuba.
In Cuba.
Yes, I visited it. It was still under construction, and we were taken close to where this was being done. This was in the mid-'80s. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in '90, that came to an end. So Cuba was never able to complete the nuclear power station. It wasn't a nuclear facility to develop a nuclear deterrent. It was a nuclear facility to power station, which would have reduced their dependence on imported oil very, very significantly. I don't think they could get that back up and running. It wasn't completed. This would have been in the end of the '80s. That's a long time, 30-odd years for them to try to get that going. So solar power is probably what they have to do more of with the support of China. And this is going to now be crucial. To what extent are China and Russia prepared to provide more economic support to Cuba? Because if they do, and the Cuban situation, economic situation, and therefore the social conditions of the Cuban people becomes that much easier, then it will strengthen Cuba's position vis-a-vis any kind of attack by the United States. So that China and Russia now really, in my view, have to do much more in terms of economic collaboration with Cuba.
What is the likelihood of the Western world using the social media that they use in Russia, in Iran, to bring about all these demonstrations in Iran with the collapse of the rial in Iran? Is it possible that you can see some of that in Cuba, and that Trump then uses that because the Americans are in Guantanamo to have a military intervention in Cuba as you had in Venezuela?
They have done it before, and so what was it, about 2 years ago, I'm losing track of timelines, about 2-3 years ago, there were some significant demonstrations in Cuba, and the government dealt with that, quite decisively, and identified some of the key people as being paid agents of the United States and so on. Oh yes, they were able to address that, and of course the U.S. then said that they're political prisoners, but the U.S. wouldn't admit that these are people who are being paid by them, the Americans, to create instability in Cuba. So I have no doubt that the Americans are going to do that again. And as I talk about support for Cuba economically, there are some other countries that have a key role to play. Brazil, Mexico, and they have been doing things, but I think Brazil and Mexico, because Lula was very close with Fidel.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Before Lula came to power, I remember going to conferences in Cuba, and Lula was there. He was then leader of the Workers' Party, former trade union leader of the Workers' Party of Brazil, but he was not yet president.
Yeah.
And Lula started with Fidel's support. After discussion with Fidel, the Sao Paulo Forum. So it started in Sao Paulo, which is why it's called the Sao Paulo Forum. That's where Lula had his base, because Sao Paulo is kind of industrial capital of Brazil. And the Sao Paulo Forum brings together progressive left political parties.
It's interesting that you pronounce it as Sao Paulo, because they don't do that in Brazil. They call it São Paulo.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
São
not able
Paulo,
to,
yeah, go ahead.
And it brings together left and progressive political parties from Latin America and the Caribbean. My party, the MSJ, is a member of the Foro. And so I attend meetings of the Foro. The last meeting I attended was actually in January in Caracas. So there are not many parties in the Caribbean. The Cuban Communist Party, of course, is a member of the Foro. There are parties from Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Apart from Trinidad and Tobago, MSJ, the St. Lucia Labour Party, which is in government, is also a member of the Foro. And there's a party, small party in Belize, Belize People's Front. So Brazil, I think, has to do much more in terms of support for Cuba economically, trade and so on, and other kinds of assistance. Mexico, which has a big economy, and the president of Mexico, her party is a coalition that is in government, the Workers' Party of Mexico, and the party, the Morena Party, which is led by Sheinbaum, the president. They are in an alliance, and both of them have very close relations with Cuba. So Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, although it's far away, because Cuba provided hundreds of scholarships for South Africans during the apartheid days to be trained in medicine and law, whole engineering, architecture, a whole range of capabilities and skills. And that was central to the ANC being able to take government and run the government.
Yes.
South Africa has a huge debt to Cuba. And of course, Cuba sent troops to Namibia, Angola, which defeated the South African army in two famous battles, and that enabled Angola's independence to be secured. Namibia to get its independence, and the South African army having been defeated, then the South Africans realized, because the Vietnamese economy is quite booming. Similarly, Cuba provided a lot of scholarships for Vietnamese during the
They provided 1,000 scholars, 1,000 scholarships to Pakistan. I met some of the Pakistani students in Cuba.
Yes.
They married Cuban girls. Yeah. All right.
So some of those countries now have to step up and reciprocate with economic support for Cuba.
I don't want to tax our viewing audience more. We've been more than 1 hour already. And it is very plain and clear, David, that we are at a very moment, a critical moment in our history in this part of the world. And we have to continue this dialogue because there are events which are unfolding constantly. I hope it will be possible for us to come back again, maybe in another 2 or 3 weeks from now, and to see what happens during this period of time in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and to be able to continue the discussion. What we have done today is to recognize that the United States of America appears to be on the move, and is likely to interpret the success of the kidnapping of Maduro in broad daylight as an open door for it to continue doing what it's been doing, imposing its will on this part of the world. This might take the form of military intervention. It can take the form of political intervention. It can take the form of economic intervention and monetary intervention. But the United States is on the move. And we have to therefore be constantly returning to the subject so that our listening audience, our viewing audience might benefit from your scholarship and from your analysis. Thank you, David, for spending this time with us today. It's a pity we didn't have any calls, but perhaps the subject is just a little bit too difficult for our viewing audience. Thank you, bye-bye, and we meet again.
Yes, Malala, thank you very much for having me. Perhaps some people too are a little concerned about voicing their opinion.
Oh, yes.
There's some fear in this society. And we need to break that fear, yes?
Yeah.
And let me just say that on Tuesday next, and I'll send you the invitation formally, but we're going to be having an online forum, what we're calling an assembly, where we're getting people from throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, elsewhere.
Where is this?
It's going to be online primarily, and there'll be some physical.
Please inform the audience.
Yes, they'll be online, and we will send the information to the media so that people could register. The people have to register, but there'll be we will be in a space where some people could gather physically in Trinidad, but not a lot, maybe 100, 150.
What day is this?
Tuesday, the 13th.
Next Tuesday.
Tuesday the 13th.
What time?
5 o'clock in the afternoon.
5 in the afternoon. And what's the contact email? Or?
Yes, they could. I suppose the easiest email would be to contact me, which is my name, davidabdullah@gmail.com.
David, put it down at the bottom of the screen, please, Asidik. davidabdullah@gmail.com. That's the email address. If you want to join in the discussion next Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you must send an email to davidabdullah@gmail.com. Please put it at the bottom of the screen.
My Abdullah has one L.
And one L for Abdullah.
Yes. It's
one L for Abdullah.
Long story.
Okay.
My grandfather spelled his name with one L, and his brother spelled it with two.
All right. When we are rebroadcasting this, we put it at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, David, for this important session that we've had, and we look forward to another one soon, inshallah.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank
you. All right. Bye-bye.